But that's easy to fix because it's methodology and nothing more. Uzi Eilam, you got to the headquarters just a couple of days before the war, and you heard a very important discussion there. Can you please give us a taste of what was going on there just before the war? Let me just start off by saying that as the head of a branch in the weapons division, I had already had some experience in the general staff because we used to have we used to be on duty there, and therefore I knew it well. Now, this session is about the top command. But I'm not going to read excerpts from my book right now. But let me try and explain. One of the things which typified the mentality of the general staff after 67 war was utter complacency after the glorious victory of 67. And I will get to that discussion about discipline that I participated in 2 days before the war. But even during the war of attrition, the writing was on the wall, large and clear, but we didn't read the writing. There was the threat of the surface-to-air missiles. We didn't know about the SA-6, but there was the SA-2 and 3, and there was the Saga missiles. We saw what was happening, but we didn't understand to what extent that they became part of the doctrine and the tactics of the Egyptian soldiers who afterwards threatened our tanks. There was even writing on the wall concerning bridges and crossings at the Karame operation. They tried and eventually succeeded in building a bridge right next to the Adam Bridge, and the Centurions could roll over it. And it turned out in Karame that under fire it was very difficult to build bridges, but in the Yom Kippur War it became obvious that they could, but at first they used rafts. And the writing was on the wall also concerning our anti-tank capabilities, which for some reason the military didn't want to accept. Talik, who was the deputy chief of staff and the head of operations, said that the IDF is saturated with anti-tank means. He meant tanks. And there was also some misconception about the infantry, which we found out after the war. This complacency and the fact that we didn't draw any lessons from the Six-Day War eventually brought us to a situation where we were not prepared for it, neither mentally nor physically. And on my second day in the General Command, on the 4th of October, they were discussing discipline and governance. And on Friday afternoon, they convened together with Dayan, and Eli Zeira was saying that his estimate is that there will be no war, and still we were not so sure that a war is going to break out. Then the general staff gets all the information and all the communication, and it's true that Dado, in order to understand what's going on, really went out to the field. I remember that on the second day there should have been a discussion with the Chief of General Staff, but then it was obvious that Dado was in the south and Talik was in the north, and it was obvious that something was not going right. I also collected all the little notes about what was going on, and you can see from that the extent to which in the on the first day how much puzzlement there was, and no one knew what was going on. There were radios all around the discussion room, the meeting room, and the radio was transmitting pleas for help and all kinds of calls and supplications, and there was nothing we could do. And if we can discuss it later on, perhaps we'll talk a little bit about the Air Force. But speaking of those notes, David Ivry is here, and I want to explain. There's a note that I wrote to David Ivry when he participated in one of the discussions. I asked him what's happening with the azimuth system, and he wrote back to me that it was not operational yet. And that was a clear sign of our feeling that the Air Force didn't feel comfortable with the anti-aircraft umbrella that they had both in the north and in the south, and in the general staff we couldn't do anything about that either. Just one other thing, and then I'll stop there. The way in which they were making decisions in the general staff headquarters was through operations, and the information was coming in through operations. There weren't any plasma screens, of course, or anything. There were chronographs and maps, and every day they had to be updated. And this kind of follow-up, that was the basis for every discussion. Today, I understand fully that the general staff, with the data that it had, couldn't have any impact. They couldn't do anything because there weren't any more reserves. It doesn't matter how you look at it, but there weren't any other forces you couldn't that you could use. The force was built in such a way that was it. There was nothing else. And in one of the reports, you can see that Talik was trying to take another battalion out of the Armored Corps school and move it from one place to another, and those kind of things, and sending the Air Force from one front to another here and there. All that just attests to the fact that we didn't have any reserves, and that was the limitation that the headquarters had to deal with.